Welcome to the Matchmaker Mentor Podcast, the show where aspiring and experienced matchmakers come to sharpen their skills, grow their businesses, and elevate the matchmaking industry. Your host is Arlene Washburn, an award-winning ethical matchmaking advocate, mentor, and industry innovator. Let's dive in.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Matchmaker Mentor Podcast, where we bring you the best insights from experts in relationships, business, personal growth to help you thrive in your world of matchmaking. And today, I have a truly special guest, Melissa Nanavati, a relationship architect and high-performance relationship coach. She's not only an international speaker, but also a best-selling college textbook author, and we're going to get into that. And she's the creator of the Love Action Playbook, where she helps high achievers cultivate love, intimacy, and deep connections in their lives. And Melissa, I am so excited to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so thrilled to be here today.
Yeah. So right off the bat, want to understand, you describe yourself as a relationship architect, and you're dedicated to helping high performers to build like these thriving, peaceful relationships. And I want you to elaborate on how does this role come to be, and is it different from regular coaching?
To answer your question, it really does differ from traditional coaching in that for me, it's all about giving frameworks, right? So my goal is not necessarily to hold someone's hand through the entire process, but especially high performers. They want the tools, they want to be able to implement it themselves. And then for me to just kind of continue to be there as a resource as needed. And where I really saw the need for this was for myself. So I would be kind of a self-described high achiever, high performer. I graduated with honors from college when I was 19 years old. I entered the workforce extremely young and, ended up starting my own business, became a self-made millionaire by the age of 30 and struggled so much in the dating world. I actually went on over 100 first dates before I met my now husband. And so for me, it was through seeing what are the kind of struggles that I'm experiencing and how does that relate to people that are also really successful in their career, but not really finding that same success in their love life. So for me, that's really the focus. And it's a personal passion, having been somebody who went through the ringer in that department. And then also getting into the science of it. When we had spoke before, I love science, and that's been a personal passion of mine. So getting into really the nitty gritty of the biology, what hormones are at play early dating versus long-term relationships, and how can you keep that early dating feeling, the dopamine hits in your relationship as you continue on. So I think for high performers, there's a real special need to not only have a partner who's incredibly supportive, but to feel that experience of love and newness even while striving.
I love everything that you just said, and it so resonates with me. I'm currently not really coaching singles like I used to, but I'm very much a science-based dating and relationship coach. And when I was really heavily involved in that, you would have been my perfect client because
I would have loved to know you then.
well, part of it is I'm similar in that I'm very incredulous. So I always need science and research to really accept, frameworks and ideas, because what I find in the world of coaching is that a lot of it is anecdotal. And so you have people just talking, exclusively off of their anecdotal experiences, which is important and it's great, but you need the majority, and you need some kind of framework like science and research to give you the majority based on the studies and things like that. So tell me more about the science and research and how you've delved into that. I mean, you probably are a researcher, someone who's written, textbooks. I'm sure some of that is right up your alley.
100%. So much of the textbook industry, while the textbook I wrote was not in the same space, is all about research. When you write a textbook, every single thing that you include has to be cited with sources and research. And so for me, really diving into a lot of the work done already by the Gottman Institute, which I'm a huge fan of, and their research into marriages and what makes things work. And then really on the biology side, hormones. So I think it's so valuable, especially for people in early dating or for matchmakers when you're setting people up, to get this idea of that the spark has to be there initially out of their heads. you can create a spark. And when I dove into the science of what really creates, that chemistry that people talk about, that new spark, it's a combination of oxytocin, the bonding hormone, serotonin, which is that good feeling that you get, and then as well as dopamine. So dopamine is kind of the hormone that dissipates as you spend more time with someone, because dopamine is that pleasure, that quick reward hormone, and that happens from novel experiences. So for example, if you're not having novel experiences with your partner, if you're not going on new dates or exploring new places, it's likely that that feeling will fade over time, which I think is a lot of why there's this common, phrase thrown around, oh, the honeymoon phase ends. Well, I believe that it doesn't have to. I believe that you can experience elements of it and it gets to shift and evolve if you're applying the science of it, the science of hormones and, beyond chemistry, the kind of the framework that I love that Gottman talks about a lot is chemistry, intimacy, and connection. So chemistry is that initial spark. Intimacy is what deepens the connection, and then connection is what sustains the relationship. But I still think you can play at that beginning stage throughout your relationship.
I love this. I feel like I'm talking to myself.
Well, I'm honored.
I'm like, yes. I am curious. I'm going to ask you a little bit of a controversial question.
Please.
And I'm curious what your take is since you're so freaking smart. What are your thoughts about men coaching women or women coaching men in the relationship space?
So, in terms of, do I think it's valuable? What specifically?
I have this theory, and this is a little controversial, and I think it is valuable to hear from a man how perhaps some men would want women to be and act and do be whatever.
Mm-hmm.
However, it's hard for a man to understand how our brains work and the hormone, because I really feel like we're very different in some ways, as much as humans are similar.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's a lot of value in women coaching women and men coaching men in terms of how to have success in relationships with the understanding of what that particular individual is. In other words, a man can never, can't think like a woman. And so I feel like if another woman can teach another woman how to be successful, I think there's a lot of value there. By the same token, I do believe that yes, men can provide value in understanding how some men want to be treated and how they want to connect with women, etc. I don't know that. I don't even know if I made sense, but
No,
what
that
are
makes
your
perfect.
thoughts?
Absolutely. And I think that you have a very valid point. And my thought process is that I think the information and the coaching specifically can be valuable depending on the stage that that person's in.
Mm,
So, for example, I've seen a lot of very successful women coaching men or men coaching women in the early, I haven't found my partner yet stage. In the dating phase, I've seen that work well in many cases, but I also think that it only works well if that person is not just speaking, to your point, from anecdotal experience, if
mm,
they're also speaking from research. Because if we're looking at the same body of research of how men and women behave and what works at different stages, I think that there is value in being coached by someone of the opposite sex. But I think once you're in relationship, I think that there's a little bit more personal understanding of what the experience is of being the woman in the partnership or the man in the partnership. So for me, it depends, I think, more on the stage that they're in. And if
mhm.
that person is coaching from a place of only personal lived experience or research too.
Okay, I love that. That's great. I know you have a really cool story, so I really want to hear how you and your husband got together, and I would love for the audience to be able to hear this as well.
I appreciate that. So for my husband and I, we had a pretty unique way of meeting. So I had, we'd both done a lot of personal work independently prior to ever meeting. And I would definitely deem my husband as a very, very high performer in his craft. He's also a speaker and author, and we had a lot of similarities. And we were actually both often told we were too much prior to meeting each other. And that's where I really finally had to come to a place of, after being on so many dates, 100 plus first dates before I met my husband, really owning who I am and what I'm looking for, and wanting to be with somebody who could match my intensity, who could match my desire for growth. And so at the time, I had been living in Oregon for about 12 years. I'm currently in Arizona for context. And at the end of my time there, I had done a lot of personal work with not only kind of relationship coaches, but therapists, and ended up at a meditation retreat where on the final day of the meditation retreat, we were invited to do visioning of our future. And I had a vision that I perceived to be, a step into the future. And in that vision, I didn't see a specific person, but I had a feeling. I knew what the relationship would feel like, look like, and I saw palm trees. And so, only a few weeks after this meditation retreat, I broke my lease, gave away all of my belongings besides what would fit in my car, and moved to Scottsdale, Arizona, only knowing one person. Now, my friends and family thought, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Listen, beyond just moving here on intuition, I have a strategy. I'm going to go to a new event every single week and tell everyone I meet that I'm looking for my person, and be really open and vulnerable about that." So, beyond just the move that was purely based on intuition, I had an action plan. And so, as soon as I got here, I started putting myself out there. And the very first event that I went to was a breath work and ice bath workshop, because I'm really into kind of like science and biohacking. And the man who put on the event was one of my husband's good friends. So we had connected afterwards, and he said, "How can I help you get integrated here?" And I said, "To be honest with you, I'm looking for a man." And he said he loved my boldness and just authenticity. And I said, "Listen, my business is doing great, but I'm looking for a man." And he said, "I am going to introduce you to a friend of mine who runs a local hiking group." And that just so happened to be my now husband. So we met one of the first times we really spent any measurable time together. We were actually hiking through the desert. And keep in mind, I'm an indoor girl. I only decided to go hiking to meet a man. So that was not a hobby we had in common. But on this hike, he had actually been on a 7-day fast. And so he was kind of putting himself to the depths of things, training for, he's an endurance athlete, and he was in training essentially. And I actually had an allergic reaction on the hike that caused my eyes to swell shut. And between the two of us, he was practically delirious, but I was helping take care of him. We kind of endured this really wild experience, 102 degrees for 5 hours through the Arizona desert. And throughout this time, we actually ended up going really deep. We had these really profound conversations about what we were looking for, who we are, our past, telling each other stories. And by the end, I sort of realized this was my person. He unfortunately doesn't remember most of that hike because he was so delirious. So I ended up actually asking him on our first date. And from there, we dated very rapidly. We went deep, super quick, lifestyle value alignment, values alignment. What do we want? What is our future? And honestly, by the third date, we'd pretty much agreed to be together for the next several months, because he was about to go on an expedition in Antarctica. And he said, "I don't really want to go down this path with someone unless they're serious, and we're going to be together then." And by going that deep, we were able to assess and really start to get a feel for each other. We got engaged in 2 months and married in 6.
That is such an amazing story, and it does make a lot of sense. I often tell people that they should allow time in order to really assess if someone's the right person for them. As you would know, the limerence is something that kicks in, and you're not really coherent. It's almost like you're drugged, right? But in a
Yeah.
situation like yours, and very similar actually to my daughter, when she met her now husband, I actually gave her a list of questions, and I said, "Why don't you two sit down, have some drinks, and just gamify it, right? And
Yeah.
just go over all these things to make sure that you're in alignment." And I think the reason we give people time, aside from the limerence, is that often it's so superficial the way that they date, that it's not very intentional. They don't have conversations that are meaningful to really assess if it's a good match. People are just trying to impress each other, and some
Not
people
be
are,
rejected, have fun. Exactly.
yeah, being chameleon daters and trying to, distort yourself to like impress someone because you think he's good on paper or whatever. But the other thing that I love that you did, because I often talk about this and I've written so many articles about, get everyone to be your matchmaker. Like, don't be shy just because you're single. that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. Now you've prioritized that you want to get into a relationship. So go tell everybody and be specific.
Yes.
And the fact that you allowed someone to introduce you, how many people say, oh, I don't want you to I don't want my friends setting me up on blind dates. I'm like, why? That doesn't make any sense.
I could not agree more. And it was interesting too. So Akshay, my husband, and I both made lists of all the qualities we were looking for in the other person well before we ever met. And they weren't the superficial things. Like, yes, of course you want to be attracted to your partner, but we didn't have height requirements. We didn't have ethnicity requirements. I'm the first Asian woman he's dated, and he was the first Indian man I ever dated. So we didn't allow types to limit us either, which was really big. But when we eventually looked at each other's list, it was, I think, a few weeks in, we were 100% of each other's lists.
Wow.
And because we had that clarity and the conversations. And to your point, so many people stay at this very surface level. And of course, you don't want to grill the person you're on a date with, right? You don't want to have that feeling either. But I think there's very clever ways to ask questions. So one of my favorite questions to share with people when they're dating is to ask someone on a first date who they admire and why. And the reason for that is the reasons the person shares that they admire that person are actually their values. Because if you ask someone what their values are, usually they'll say really wonderful things. But are they living them? Do their stories align with them? So another example was for my husband, I really wanted somebody who was generous. Generosity is like at the core value. But if you ask someone if they're generous, they're going to say yes. Almost no one's going to say, I'm stingy. But the stories he told of how he was with his time. So he told me this story, especially on that hike, where he was really stressed out the previous month because he had a big speaking event coming up. And one of his friends said, hey, can you help me move? He dropped everything to go help his friend move. And he was telling me how much that stressed him out. And I thought, you don't do that unless you're a generous person. So I think really paying attention to the stories that people are telling you on these dates really show who they are.
God, you and I are so aligned. I mean, and I have I have a colleague, Brandon Rader. He and I usually do a weekly live, and we talk a lot about telling stories rather than rapid fire questions, which is I think what the people default to, which is very uncomfortable and often are to garner like yes no answers or to put people on the spot where they say what they think you want to hear, as opposed to telling stories and stories that have sort of your core values built into it. So I think that's amazing that you are like so aligned. I love also that it sounds like you guys are just like super smart and real go-getter, high achievers. And so your approach to this whole situation would be very different than the average person. And one of the things that I thought I read somewhere that you mentioned, there's a lot of misinformation out there that's not ideal for high achievers. I want to hear more about that because I do agree 100%. I can tell now that we're
Yeah,
totally in sync, but people need
100%.
to hear this stuff.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the biggest things that can be really challenging for if you're a high performer is hearing that everything has to be 50-50, whether that's in the dating process or in the relationship process. I think that's really problematic because life happens in seasons. And I do believe that life happens in seasons for everyone, but especially high performers. There are going to be seasons where one of you has way more work demands than the other, especially if you're an entrepreneur. And so really not just assuming the other person's going to put in equal effort, but having conversations of, all right, maybe this is time I need you to put in 80% and I've got 20% to give at the end of the day in terms of just life house. So a great example of this was my husband was training for 4 years to be one of the first people to ski across Antarctica. And so he was gone for months on end during our first year of marriage. And ultimately, during that time in that training, he was also fundraising 1.1 million for this expedition. So he was physically training to do the deed, and then he was also raising money. If I had expected him to put in equal effort in everything, in chores, cooking, whatever, that would have broke us. There's no way that would have worked. But I also knew that once he was done with this journey, that the scales would tilt and shift because we had discussed it. And so now he's back and he's participating more in house chores, right? Even making money. So at the time, I was not only financing our life, but I was taking care of everything, almost everything in terms of house, cooking, planning. And I felt good giving that amount because I understood it was a season and we had agreed upon this as a season. Now, that also didn't give him the excuse to just stop making me feel loved or do anything or plan dates. What I was so impressed by was the fact that he did prioritize it. He operationalized it. He bought me flowers almost every week. He would surprise me with little gifts and notes and all the things that he knew made me feel loved. But I think that's one of the biggest kind of relationship killers, is that expectation that everything should be 50-50. And then even beyond that, that you have to have quality time every week, that you have a certain number of dates or your relationship is going to fail. Many high performers are gone for weeks out of the month, business trips, whatever that may be. But really being able to zoom out and again, look at things in terms of seasons, or not just looking at that week, but that month. What are, some times we can set aside for quality time, even if it may not happen during this week or these few weeks. So those are kind of the two big ones for me that really stand out. And then a third one is that you have to follow traditional timelines. So we're a great example, not saying everyone should get married in under 6 months, but I do think this notion that you have to go dating for a certain number of years, then married, then have a house, then have kids just doesn't work. I think that doesn't work honestly for most people. I think that you get to co-create what your unique life looks like. And I think that there's a lot of value in that can both bring less pressure, but more happiness and joy and ease to the relationship, and not having to follow those kind of traditional timelines. And then the fourth one is really that fighting is normal and healthy. I think disagreements are normal, but I think the yelling, dysregulated fighting is not. And I think we can be held to a higher standard, and practice a different framework. There's actually even a framework that I have on my website. It's called the Proactive Framework, and it's an acronym essentially of how to navigate a disagreement or to bring up a sensitive issue in a way that your partner can really hear and receive you. And I think that when you make that commitment to not let issues fester and really dig deep to address things as they come up, that's the level I think that high achievers especially are capable of. And I think that we need to hold ourselves to a higher standard. And then the last one is simply that the honeymoon phase will end. I think that again creates complacency in the same way that other one does, in that, we can express gratitude. We can do these things that make our partner feel seen, felt, heard, loved, valued. And just saying, oh, we're in year whatever, that just goes away, I think creates complacency.
Love everything that you shared, and I agree 100%, which is not often the case because I don't always agree with my guests. But no, that was so on target. And you've actually helped me to make a little bit of a paradigm shift, because often we have like, and maybe I'm conflating things. So high achievers are not always necessarily like alphas, but like if you have two people that are, and I guess what I equate an alpha to is someone that's like really large and in charge, and it becomes kind of like competitive and difficult. But high achievers can be very peaceful and zen in what in their achievements. And also, when you are a high achiever, you usually have these big goals you want to achieve, and so you sort of break it down and say, okay, well, this and this. So to your point, knowing that your spouse has this major goal, you become part of that too, because that's another thing in relationships, is that your goals are not the only goals. Your spouse's goals should be important to you. If not, you're probably not ready for a committed relationship. So seeing that as your goal as well makes you be supportive. And then I loved what you said about having it all. I believe in integration. People talk about
I
balance.
love that word too. I don't believe in balance at all.
Exactly. What do you
Integration.
I mean, I hear people talk about work-life balance, this about, I'm like, get out of town with that crap, because good luck with that. There's a season for everything, and that is so true. But just going back to the first thing you said, which was you asked your husband on a first date, which I love, because
Thank you.
only maybe 10% of the women out there are doing that. And the rest are just sitting and waiting for a guy to approach and to be the one who makes the first move. And times have changed. There's a new construct, and the construct is there is no construct. So everybody's confused. Everybody has their own ideas. They have parents telling them one thing or friends telling them another. And what you said, it's like, what works for you? You meet a guy who you think is great, who's in alignment. You've had all this time that you spent with him, and you know that there's a good probability of a great relationship here. Why would you let that go? Because, oh, he never called me, so get out of town.
I could not agree more. And, the funny thing is, my husband tells people this now a lot. So he used to say, before I actually heard him speak on a podcast, which helped me know that I need to ask him on our first date. He said, he's a former Marine. And he said, I am more afraid to ask a woman out than to go to war. And he openly says that. And he even says to this day, I don't know what would have happened if you didn't make the first move. Of course, after that first date, he followed up, he started planning dates. So I think that a lot of people are saying that out of a positive place, in that, they want to make sure that the woman, that the guy is in, or the woman, has that mutual interest from the man. But the reality is, who initiates doesn't really matter. And I
Right.
think there's so much value in that. And men are scared of asking women out too. This belief that, oh, they should make the first move. If you're scared, they are certainly scared too. And so I think that, yes, you need that effort and reciprocity as time goes on. But to make the first move, I think would make everyone's lives a lot easier if more women did.
And let's not forget that women have been making the first move for years with the little
Totally.
handkerchief
Yes,
that they would drop on the floor. There were
exactly.
all these little signs of the first move, which was the yes, you can approach. Yes, I'm interested. That's
Mhm.
all the guy needs. It's a little nudge or a little extra, eye gazing to let them know that it's okay to approach, especially when you're in a group, a gaggle of women, like, which is very hard to kind of break through. I think that's really important for women to hear that we're in an era where that doesn't make you masculine.
No. And that doesn't mean they're not interested either,
Right.
because men definitely don't read all the signs either. We joke about all the things that I did to try and get him to ask me out before I finally asked him out on our first date, and he deflected. He had no idea what was going on. I was trying to be flirtatious, and he missed absolutely everything I was doing. And he himself said, I wasn't sure still, right? So I think that this expectation that they should notice something, maybe we eye gaze for 3 seconds, but the other person barely notices for one. So I think there can be a lot of missed signals if
Mhm.
we rely strictly on signals. So I think, yeah, this is the invitation, if there's any women listening, especially that are single, to make the first move. And the worst thing you do is hear no, and that person's not for you. Now you can move on with your life and keep going, because I think the fear of rejection, both for men and women, keeps us from so much. I think courage is the number one core value if we all practiced it more, both in the dating phase and the relationship phase, of bringing issues up before they fester, being the first one to make move. I think the more we can practice courage, the more successful we will be in dating and relationships.
And I just want to clarify that courage doesn't mean that there's no fear. It
100%.
means that you do it anyway, even if there's fear. And I love I think it's important to be persistent, because in anything in life, in business, if you're using a marketing tool, or you have a prospect, and you have to keep following up until you hear that yes or no. Because I look at my situation with my husband, who I was online, we met through an online platform almost 15 years ago, and he sent me the first message. I read it and deleted it. Then he sent me the second message. I read it and deleted it because he's really, really funny. The third message, read it and deleted it. By the fourth message, I said, you must be hideous looking, because if you were as cute as your messages, you would have a photo. And then the next day he had a photo.
I love
His niece uploaded it for him because he didn't know how to use a computer that way. So, not making assumptions, number one.
it.
And number two, being persistent until you get to that yes or the no, because anything in between is just like the abyss. Like, nobody wants to be in the abyss. Like, just figure out if it's yes or no, and then you can keep it moving. So I think persistence is very, very important as well.
That's a great story too.
I tell it all the time because we met online. So when we first started meeting, being introduced to people, oh, how did you guys meet? Because we're very different, different ethnicity and everything. I would say, oh, we met on Match.com, and he would just get upset or what. I'm like, get over it. Like, this is what people do now. That was 15 years ago. Now it's the norm, right? Most people are doing that. What would you say to people who are meeting online? What advice would you give to them as far as how to navigate that in the best possible way? Because I feel like there are so many apps, and yet there's still this loneliness epidemic, and people are not having success. What is happening? What's going on? Why aren't people succeeding?
I think there's decision fatigue that's occurring there. So I think if I were to go back in time, what I would have advised myself to do if I was focusing on apps is to pick one and focus there and set aside time every single day, operationalize it. If you really want to find a partner, my guess is a lot of the people that are disenchanted with it are on it for a half hour once a week. And then they get frustrated, they don't see a match, they don't send any messages. So if you're going to use it, really use it. Spend time filtering through, send the first message. Do not wait to be messaged. Very similar to asking people on dates, like initiating, really having that energy there and focused attention and not being afraid to be your authentic self. We often put up fronts both in dating and online of, oh, what's palatable, or oh, what will the other person be interested in? Be your whole self. And I think really owning who you are, not only in the dating process, but also even if you're using a digital tool, is really key. So a great example is a client friend of mine who at the time she wanted help updating her Hinge profile. And she is very religious and she didn't want to put that on her profile. And I said, you have to lead with that. God first, right? If that is core to your values. And she made that shift. I would say even just a few weeks later, she met her now husband. And that thing that stuck out to her, or to him rather, on her profile was that she had looking for a godly man, like number one on there. But she was worried previously that having something like that that's, about religion or politics would be off-putting to people. And I said, but owning who you are is going to get you somebody who's value aligned. And I actually was just at their wedding only a few weeks ago, and it was a beautiful ceremony that was God first. And to that point of owning who you are and being really clear, that's how you're going to get matches online that are actually aligned. And even beyond that, insisting on a phone call before you ever meet, because you will filter out a lot of people who are not actually serious about dating if they're not willing to get on the phone. And so for me, back when I was using the apps prior to meeting my husband, that was a filtration process for me that was really effective. Once I started requesting, hey, let's just chat for 10 minutes live to, pick a place, and it's easier to coordinate on the phone. That was the excuse I would use. But you can tell a lot in just a few minutes of talking to someone if they're comfortable with themselves, if they're confident, if they have some of those things you're looking for. And again, it will show you how much intention the other person has if they're serious about a relationship.
I agree. And I would also add to do a video chat. I just
Yes.
finished writing a book. It's being edited. I
So
wrote this booklet a long time ago about safe online dating, and most recently had a conversation with someone who will be on the show who, gave away about $1 million of her money through a relationship scam online. But that's not it. I mean, there's so many different types of scams and ways that people can get hurt essentially through
totally.
using these platforms if they don't think about safety. And to your point, I really think that it's important to hone in on one app, because I know most people will use two apps at a time. And I'm like, who has time for that? Right. So,
Yes, especially high achievers too.
yeah.
If your time is value, that's not going to work.
And the third person that I met online was my husband when I got online. And it's the same thing. I was commuting an hour each way. I was super busy and I just didn't have time for that. Like, I had a big team that I was responsible for. I couldn't be answering text messages during the day or any of that. I mean, the one thing I will say, if you're a high achiever and you're really busy, you should communicate that to the individual. So I would always preface, hey, I'm really busy during the day. If you don't hear from me, just know that I don't usually take calls
Beautiful.
during the day, right? Because you deal
Yes.
with people with an anxious attachment style,
Mhm.
and they're going to freak out that you don't answer them right away. And that's how I am. Most people who get to know me start to realize, oh, don't expect an immediate response on text with Arlene, because I feel like it's an intrusion on my time. I have big boundaries when it comes to communications.
Which
Like,
is great. And the fact that you communicate that, I think that that's something, I talk about a lot with clients as well, as over communicate. It might feel awkward, like you're telling them too much, but you're not. To your point, if you know you're in a busy season, saying, hey, I only respond to texts in the evening, just give the other person a heads up. Even if they're not anxiously attached, that level of communication is so helpful.
Yeah, and then they don't misconstrue your level of interest,
Hmm.
because you might be really into someone and that's just the schedule that you have and you can't help it and you don't have the time to be on there. So that's all really, really good advice. So online, I'm finding is sort of going downhill, in my
Funny
opinion.
you say that. I agree. Which
Yeah.
is why I've been encouraging a lot of people now to really prioritize, somewhat use the same strategy I did, in that pick a new event or a new kind of circle group to interact with every single week.
Yeah.
And don't just interact with people you're attracted to there. So that is like the big shift that has helped, I know, a number of people that I've worked with, is focusing on connecting with like-minded people for the sake of connection, because
Mhm.
you never know who, to your point, could be your matchmaker, who could have a friend that could set you up. And again, you're getting yourselves in the right circle and the people and the communities where there's more potential to have someone that's aligned that you could meet.
Yeah, especially if you meet someone who is similar to the type of person that you want to meet, but maybe they're already in a relationship, because birds of a feather flock together. And so this gentleman who introduced you to your now husband might have been someone
Yeah.
interesting, right? Where you're
He
like,
was
yeah.
he had a partner, and I was like, "That's somebody," he's very health conscious, entrepreneur. Also, I said, "I bet he has more friends that are
Hmm.
all entrepreneurs and health conscious." Exactly.
Yeah, I think turn everyone into your matchmaker.
Exactly.
But also I think it's important to pick some activity that you do frequent more than once, because proximity and
Yeah.
seeing someone over and over again can also help develop relationships that you didn't even see coming. Where you might not initially be attracted and then all of a sudden you're like, yeah, I like this person.
Yes, allow it to evolve. And I think that that's so important. We tell people often we did not have the initial spark. The first time we met was actually before that hike. He had a gathering at his house, and I got invited. And so I met a lot of his friends. So I got to see him in group settings too. And I saw how he behaved in group settings, which is also what allowed us to move quicker. But we both joke, we're like, okay, that person's all right. They're attractive enough, but we didn't have that that's my person moment. We spent more time together, we found alignment, and then the attraction grew. The chemistry sprung up from that as well.
Yeah, well, my saying is F the spark, because that is not a good source of information
No.
to be deciding whether or not someone is right for you. And if that's what you're looking for, and believe it or not, people go into their 60s and 70s still looking for that damn spark and thinking that that's a barometer for deciding who's a potential good partner. I don't understand it. I think part of it, though, I do understand that part of it is an addiction of
Mhm.
that dopamine, that initial feeling that people have and with new relationships, and then they move on to the next and the next. And it is an addiction. But if you really want to grow old with someone and be in a loving, committed relationship over time, that is not a good indicator.
I could not agree more. And I think the thing about like the dopamine cycle and that desire for that people are looking for, remembering that you can create that. So, a couple of ways to do that if you're in a relationship or even early stage, playful competitions
Mm,
actually are a great way to get dopamine release. Same thing with novel experiences. Try something new together. And that was a little bit, I would say, even of how our spark was created. So, I was not a hiker. He's a big outdoorsman. I love dance. I love partner dance. Totally different. We have no hobbies in common, but we're willing to dabble in each other's worlds. So, I think also remembering that differences don't mean incompatibility. You don't have to have all the same hobbies, but we both had this new experience together of hiking in these really extreme circumstances, going really deep. And I do feel like that created a lot of dopamine and connection for us, kind of being in the depths of suffering, if you will, together, and surviving it, right, and having those moments. I think these novel experiences, being really playful, we're both very competitive, and so we always joke, we play to win, even playing ping pong, like it gets out of hand, right? So but having those playful competitions, that's when we feel that dopamine. And I think it's something that can be created. It doesn't just have to be there. And I think the problem with a lot of books and movies, they romanticize the spark, those immediate moments. And to your point, though, that's not ultimately how you pick somebody for the long term, but that's a hard thing to give up. And if you tell someone they don't get to have that dopamine experience, that can be challenging if they haven't found their person. But what I like to do is reframe to people, you can create dopamine experiences together. They don't just have to magically be there.
Yeah. And, I've done a lot of consulting for new apps, people who want to create these dating apps. And I remember years ago, one of them was an app that was matching people based on shared hobbies.
Hmm.
And I'm a truth teller. So I was like, listen, just so you know, that is not a good barometer for deciding whether or not two people. I said, as a matter of fact, the fact that they're different, like, I don't know, like with my husband and I had never been kayaking. One of the first experiences with him was going kayaking, which I now love. But
Awesome.
but we did so many new things together that I had not done before, and he did some things that he had not done before. I think that actually made our connection sticky than, more so than if we had had things in common. And secondly, I think the fact that we come from different backgrounds and different ethnicities and everything, you come into the relationship with a curiosity and a level of desire to really learn about someone, and you're not taking for granted that, oh, well, you're like me, so we both believe in this. Because even if you come from the same place or grow up in similar areas, your home life is going to be different anyway, right? But people make those assumptions and take things for granted. But I think when you come from different ethnicities, you are very careful not to disrespect, not to assume, and you become very curious, which also adds a lot to the relationship. Not to say that everybody needs to, like, I mean, I do love interracial couples, but that said, not everybody needs to do that, but just assume that you are an interracial couple. And when you meet someone, get very curious and don't assume that just because you have the same background, that everything's the same, and be respectful and really try to find out what they're about. Because I'll tell you, I've seen it over and over again where people just take each other for granted or make assumptions, and then they end up in these relationships where your idea of traditional and my idea of traditional, or your idea of modern and my idea of modern, are very different. So, but we never had that conversation because we just assumed that this is how it is. And I love what you said about the religious part, or anything that about you that is really a strong part of your core values. I think that if you're online or anywhere, you should be very intentional about that. Because, I see people date like chameleons all the time. And especially if they meet someone online and they tick all the boxes and they're like, oh, this is a good catch. And then they start to mold themselves to be accepted or auditioning at these dates and everything. I'm like, that's not sustainable. And it's a total waste. And if you are serious about a committed relationship and you're online acting like, I'm just fun and easygoing and, like, get out, like, that's not effective. It's just going to keep you on those stupid apps longer and you're not going to have success.
Absolutely. And I really love what you said too about curiosity and being curious about the other person in addition. So, you know, curiosity, I would say, so there's kind of four in my mind core virtues in relationships. I think courage is huge. Curiosity, I would put up rank in the top four. Play, and
Hmm.
then presence. And if you really practice all of those, you're not going to get bored of your partner. And more importantly, to your point of, just because you come from the same background, every single person has a unique experience. We can both attend, say, a theater show and have a completely different experience. Same thing, you can have the same experience, take away different lessons. So always assuming you know nothing and coming from that place of curiosity, I think is really profound, not only in the dating process, but in the actual relationship. And I think that curiosity is just so undervalued as a core virtue, because to your point, people get in these relationships, they date chameleons, they, kind of massage their personality to be more palatable. And I think that's really not what creates longevity, that not what creates that deep connection that we're all really seeking. And again, I also love that you and your partner have completely different hobbies. We are the same way. So I had never gone cross country skiing before. Like I said, I was an indoor person, and he took me to do all these massive hikes and learn new skills. And similarly, he would try dancing with me. For a long time, I tried dating within the dance community because I thought, okay, similar hobbies, good. And to your point, not good. That doesn't mean anything else about that person at all. Also, it's nice to have alone time. It's nice to have novel experiences outside of your partner so that when you come back, you have stories to tell, you have something to be curious about. So I think too often we try and date someone who's exactly the same on the things that don't matter,
Mm.
like hobbies, preferences for things. Even if you look at my husband's office and my office, bright white, love lots of lights, plants, standing desk. His office, all the windows are shut, sits on a couch, under a Snuggie blanket and in the dark and has a TV on in the background. We work completely differently, and our preferences are completely different. The number of things I could tell you that we are opposite on when it comes to food preferences, absolutely everything, but our values, 100% aligned.
Yeah.
And I think that just further illustrates the point and that you were making about be who you are about the things that are your core values, because that's how you're going to really match someone who's aligned. Not all these superficial things like hobbies, even preferences are ultimately going to matter or make for a really good relationship.
I love that. It's so true. And also making sure that, yes, you're going to have differences. Of course, every person is different. Like similar, my husband, he eats meat. I don't eat meat. I'm a pescatarian. And but he respects it. And it took a while to get there because I went from eating meat to like all of a sudden I couldn't even look at it. I do eat fish, but then he didn't understand, like I don't want the fork that touched that meat to touch my food. Like I'm very kosher, if you will, about it. And it took him a minute to get to the level of respecting my boundary about this. And now he's very careful if he's cooking his meat that nothing gets mixed. And so that's the key, that the differences that you have, you need to respect each other for your differences. That's perfectly okay. That's the spice of life. As long as your core values and your relationship goals and your life goals are in alignment, then you're good. You mentioned something about visioning, and first of all, I think you are a badass, and so is your husband too. I would love to hear his story, because I just love that you just picked up and like bye, and plus all the accomplishments that you've already had, and you're beautiful, so like you've got it all going on. But I love what you were saying about visioning, because I'm looking over there because that's my vision board.
Love it.
And people always think that it's like kind of hokey and all this. I'm like, you just don't understand. There's a lot of science behind this. So tell me about your visioning and that kind of thing.
So for me, what I did was really guided actually. So I went to a neurofeedback meditation retreat, meaning I was hooked up to electrodes. I was actually hearing my own brain waves back in real time. So we had these headphones. It was like sensory deprivation, and we were we were practicing being in like alpha brain waves for a lot of it to do a lot of like healing work. But on the last day, we did practice in gamma. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the different brainwave scales, but gamma is like the frequency and really high frequency. It's even above high beta, where people tend to have these awakenings, like massive, incredible experiences. So we were practicing getting into an elevated state emotionally that was, from a scientific standpoint, triggering that actual brainwave frequency. So I could hear like gongs essentially going off in my ears whenever I was in that frequency. And what I was doing was really creating a picture of what I wanted to feel and experience in my relationship. And the things that came to me in that visioning practice was really about, we were traveling a lot. So one of our shared core values is travel. We actually spent 80% of our first year together traveling to different countries for his training. So it was like about travel. I was seeing and feeling this experience of partnership, of not just having a cheerleader, but somebody who was like in the trenches with me. Like we're co-creating, we're building business together, and now we're actually in business together. And I think where the real value lies in having those experiences is not, again, getting overly detailed on what your partner looks like or what exactly the home looks like that you want, but actually creating the feeling, the emotional experience, and kind of like the big picture of what it is you're driving towards. And I think the value in that, even from a scientific standpoint, to your point, is we are more likely to know it when we see it, pure and simple. And we're more likely to take aligned action. If you don't have a crystal clear idea of what you're driving towards, it's hard to have all your actions follow. It's like anything in business. Any high achievers know this. You set a goal, then you work backwards. And that's essentially what I did, but I was doing it in a meditative practice. So I was feeling and embodying that experience and also visioning who I wanted to be. I wanted to be the most calm, confident version of myself. And I literally felt like I grew 3 years in that experience. When I stepped out of that door, I was like, this is who I'm going to be. These are the behaviors that an elevated version, my higher self, would act. And so now I'm going to just start practicing them now.
That is so cool. And it's funny because my husband, I had done a vision board before I met him.
Love it.
And he is the third person that I met online, but he fit the bill 100%. Like it's crazy. And I've since done another vision board that I'm looking at right now, which is I've pretty much done almost everything except there's a little area that I've struggled with the fitness, and staying in shape and all that. Because I'm also a dancer. I used to go dancing every weekend.
I
Not a
did.
dancer, but like
Yeah.
salsa and all that stuff.
Yeah, same. I did Brazilian zouk, salsa, bachata, like all of those too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I used to go every weekend and I didn't have to work out because that was my workout. I mean, I would sweat my butt off. And then we haven't done that together, but he's open to it, which is another thing. I love that he is so open to anything that I want to do and I'm open to what he wants to do. Sometimes I can be like, "Oh, I don't really want to go," but I go anyway. and then and then he'll be like, and I'll say after the fact, I'm like, "Thank you so much for dragging me out. I really am glad that you forced." Because if he has an agenda, we've got, that's the agenda.
Our husbands sound very similar.
I know. I
Yeah.
know. It's so amazing. So tell me about your business. What are you doing now? I know that you've been in marketing. You've done these marketing textbooks and all that. Are you still involved in that? By the way, that's my background a little bit too.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, because it gives you so much understanding of human psychology too. I think people that have different kind of business backgrounds can bring, a different spice to their coaching and what they offer. And so my focus fully now is really on not only just the speaking part, but I'm actually working on a book. And so that process is well underway that is specifically targeted at high performers and really how to approach the dating process from owning who you are, the early stage dating. And so really just diving into a lot of that research and effort too, and really applying the same rigor that I did to the textbooks to this book. So that has been a core focus for me, as well as helping people. And that comes in many forms. So helping high performers, I've been doing a lot of events for people locally here in Scottsdale, as well as some one-on-one coaching, but it's more around creating resources for me. So I have like a resource page up on my website that I'm starting to offer different things in terms of just actionable kind of playbooks, workbooks that people can utilize. And then if it's the right fit, I am doing the one-on-one work as well in terms of my business, and actually even doing some joint VIP days with my husband. So his area of focus, he is co-authoring the relationship book with me, but his area of focus is mindset mastery. So together we're doing some VIP days for entrepreneurs where it's both mindset and relationship. And that's really been the core focus of how I help and support people in this. But for me, the biggest thing is sharing the knowledge, whether that's speaking, writing, resources. I want everyone to experience a peaceful, thriving relationship without having to sacrifice their goals. And that's my ultimate mission and passion.
I'm so glad that you came onto this show because I just love you, and maybe because I feel like I'm looking in the mirror. And by the way, Scottsdale is one of my favorite places. I used to go there all the time. It's absolutely stunning.
Amazing.
And a great place to have retreats and things like that because it's so nice. Well, maybe at some point, if you travel in this direction, I'm in New Jersey, but in the best kept secret of New Jersey, which is out in the
Ooh.
country, you and your husband can come stay with us because this is a beautiful area too. But I do love Arizona so much. I love that you're doing this with your husband because I mean, I read a lot of books. I used to read a book a week. I've not been doing that recently, but mental toughness and Marines and, people like I read all that stuff. I just can't get enough of it. But it's so relevant. People don't realize like books on negotiations and like, all these different authors that I'm sure you would know the names if I started, speaking of them. That stuff is very helpful to understand human nature, understand relationships, and navigate relationships more effectively. So I with you 100%. So
So
you're doing VIP days
mhm.
and you're doing some
Some
retreats.
some one-on-one coaching at this point, but then primarily like the VIP days is really where we like to work with people because people are busy, especially those who we work with are usually kind of CEOs, executives, really just trying to get the information, apply it, and then of course we're available as they're implementing it. Questions come up, but VIP days have been really our focus, and then we're about to launch a few courses. But in terms of one-on-one work, that's really our core focus.
And I could see that being super effective with two high achievers working with someone. They're going to grow exponentially in 1 day or 2 days because I'm sure you're going to bring it, and it's a different method than some other programs out there where they require an extended period of time. So I can see how that could be very, very valuable, and you have each other as a as an example of the kind of couples that you want to be.
Absolutely. And I
um,
really appreciate too. And that's so much for us is we want to dig deep with people very quickly. And that happens in the one-on-one kind of containers to your point. And like that's where we really love kind of customizing like the VIP days for people to like 1 day or 2 days. And then it's our full dedicated focus. And to what you were saying earlier about men coaching men, women coaching women, we really love being able to do this together. So there's that shared perspective. It's not just the female experience plus research. It's not just the male experience plus research, but it's lived, and we are really open about the things and how we've navigated a lot of similar challenges very early on because of all the things around fundraising that a lot of high performers experience and how that impacted our relationship and what we did to move through those challenging times.
And I love that you work with high performers because if it's anything like me, I like give me the executive summary. Like 1 day, I'm very quick on the uptake. I
Yep.
don't need, but some people do need the time and space to implement. But some people are very quick on the uptake and they
That's
can't
why we have the
tolerate
course, right?
it.
That's exactly why we're launching the course too, is for people who want to just take that in, who are more self-study
Mm-hmm.
and being able to be that resource. So kind of having those two different offerings is kind of the primary focus for us right now.
That's amazing. I cannot believe that it has been an hour. I can talk to you for another 2 hours, but what is the best way for people to reach out to you and to connect with you and your husband to really experience this amazing? I mean, I can't even imagine what a 1 day VIP day would be with you because you're so sharp and I think you're right on target. I know it's subjective. But I love that you're focused on the science and the research. And by the way, Dr. Gottman is like the king. And did you know he's Dominican? That's where
I
my
did
family.
not know that. Oh, that's a wonderful fun fact.
Yeah. So
Um,
he's somebody that I love, and I when I found out he was Dominican, I was like, oh, we have something in I mean, my parents are from there, but anyway, what's the best way to reach you?
So the best way to reach me is through Instagram or my website, Melissa Nanavati. I know my last name is now quite complicated to spell. So also if you type in peak performance love, that's an easy way to find me. So peakperformancelove.com or melissananavati.com will take you to the same spot. And from there, there's the resource contact form if you're looking for those VIP days. And I also just share a lot of free resources there. So my goal is to spread the knowledge far and wide, and whoever that really resonates with, and if someone wants that deep dive, I'm here to provide that support. So Instagram and my website are the best way to connect.
Yeah, and I also saw that you have a booklet on there that I downloaded, and I thought it was right on target. And it's just a quick, punchy kind of thing to really go to that website, and we will share it in the show notes. I think you'll get a lot out of just that little booklet itself. It's a little freebie, and it's also very powerful and very punchy. So,
I
thank
appreciate
you.
it. We've got two freebies there. So one is the thing we chatted about a little bit earlier, kind of like the 5 relationship killers for high
That's it.
performers. Yep.
Hmm.
And then the other one that's a quick read if you're looking to kind of reignite that spark in your relationship. It's just 5-minute love rituals and different things that you can do to make your partner feel loved and supported. And that's just called the Love Action Playbook. So a couple of those things all available. And then, I'll continue to add resources there as well. So that's a great place to just check back to.
I love it. Thank you so much, Melissa. I'm so grateful to have you on. I hope you'll come back again.
Oh, I would be honored. I could talk to you forever too. I could not believe the hour was up.
I know. And this information is very helpful for the audience, whether they're daters that tend to be C-suite people because they work with matchmakers, but also for matchmakers because not all matchmakers are coaches. So getting this type of information is very helpful for them so they can guide their clients, or sometimes they will refer them to a coach so that the people are getting what they need to learn how to fish, and then they bring the fish as well. So
Absolutely.
thank you again, and we'll have to have you back on.
Oh, I'm so honored. Thank you so much for the conversation and sharing space today.
And thanks to Hannah. I love when women support other women. We met through Hannah Chapman. Thank you, Hannah,
Yes,
for
thank you.
bringing this amazing, badass woman to my show. Thank you.
So honored.
Thank you for tuning in to the Matchmaker Mentor Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with fellow matchmakers and friends. For more resources, training, and inspiration, visit lovepromastermind.com and follow us on social media. Remember, matchmaking isn't just a career, it's a calling. Let's keep building connections, changing lives, and growing together. Until next time, stay inspired and keep